The Appalachian mist hung heavy that morning, swirling around 12-year-old Elijah Mason as he trudged up the forgotten trail. His worn shoes, 3 sizes too big and stuffed with newspaper, left muddy prints on the damp earth. The coal dust that perpetually clung to everything in their hollow had worked its way into the creases of his hands, no matter how hard he scrubbed. Hunger gnawed at his belly, a familiar companion these days since Pa's accident at the mine. He wasn't supposed to be this far up Poor Mountain, but something had drawn him here, past the warnings of sinkholes and abandoned mine shafts. When the mist parted, revealing the weathered steeple of an old church bathed in golden morning light, Elijah stopped. The building seemed to shimmer, as if not quite of this world. What waited for him beyond those ancient wooden doors? What power could turn a forgotten place into hallowed ground? Coal dust settled into everything in Coleridge Hollow, the creases of work shirts, the lines of tired faces, and the dreams of children. The Mason family cabin sat nestled against the hillside, its weathered boards bearing silent witness to generations of miners who'd lived and died by what lay beneath the mountains. Inside, Elijah struck a match and carefully lit his father's old miner's lamp. The brass was dented on one side, a reminder of the cave-in 6 months ago that had crushed William Mason's leg and the family's fortunes along with it. The flame cast long shadows across the sparse kitchen where his mother, Ruth, was stretching yesterday's stew with extra water and what few wild onions Elijah had managed to forage yesterday. "Any change in Pa?" Elijah asked, placing the lamp on the table between them. His mother's hands never stopped moving as she shook her head. "Fever's the same. Dr. Pearson says we need real medicine, not just willow bark tea." The worry lines around her eyes had deepened since Pa's accident, making her look 20 years older than her 35. From the back room came a rattling cough that made both of them wince. 8-year-old Sadie's lungs had never been strong, but the damp spring had worsened her condition. Coal dust didn't discriminate between those who worked the mines and those who merely lived in their shadow. "That's why I'm heading up to Poor Mountain," Elijah said, stuffing a piece of cornbread into his pocket. "Old man Whitaker says there's wild ginseng growing up past the ridge. Apothecary in Bristol pays good money for the roots." Ruth paused, her stirring. "Your Pa wouldn't want you wandering that far alone. Pa would want Sadie to have medicine," Elijah countered, his voice gentle but firm beyond his 12 years. "And we can't afford it otherwise." The silence that followed acknowledged the bitter truth. William's mining accident benefits had been cut after the company. Doctor declared he could return to light duties, though what those might be for a man who could barely stand remained a mystery. Elijah took the lamp and moved to the back room. His father lay still on the bed, face grey as slate against the patchwork quilt. Beside him, Sadie's small form curled like a comma, her breath coming in wheezes. "I'll be back before sundown," Elijah whispered, though he doubted his father could hear. He placed the lamp on the bedside table, its warm glow catching on the silver frame of their family photograph taken 3 years ago when the mine was producing and there had been enough for small luxuries like photographs and store-bought shoes. Sadie stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "You going treasure hunting, Lijay?" she asked, using her special name for him. He smiled, brushing back her damp hair. "Something like that, squirrel. You rest up now." Outside, dawn was just breaking over the eastern ridge. Elijah pulled his father's too large jacket tighter around his thin frame and began the long walk out of the hollow. The other miners' children watched from porches and dirt yards as he passed, their eyes holding the same aged look that Elijah saw in his own reflection at the mouth of the hollow where the dirt road met the county highway. Elijah paused at the small white church where the community gathered every Sunday. Pastor Miller stood on the steps, sweeping away the persistent coal dust. "Early start, Elijah Mason," the pastor called. "Yes, sir." "Going looking for ginseng up on Poor Mountain." Pastor Miller's brow furrowed. "That's mighty far for a boy alone. And folks say that old church up there is best left alone." "What old church?" Elijah asked, curiosity momentarily overriding his purpose. "Just an old mining chapel, abandoned after the big collapse in '62. Some say it's haunted, but that's just hollow talk. The pastor reached into his pocket and pressed something into Elijah's hand, a silver dollar. For your sister's medicine. No need to go chasing ghosts. Elijah stared at the coin, pride warring with necessity. I can't take charity, Pastor. It's not charity when it's family. We're all family in the hollow. With reluctant gratitude, Elijah pocketed the coin and continued on his way. But as the road began to climb, he found his thoughts turning from ginseng to the abandoned church the pastor had mentioned. His grandfather had spoken of it once, a place where miners had once found more than just prayers answered. With each step up the mountain, something pulled at Elijah, a feeling he couldn't name. The mist swirled around him as he left the familiar path, drawn upward by something more compelling than reason. Something that promised answers to questions he hadn't even thought to ask. The church stood before him, like something from another time. Weathered grey boards, a listing steeple, and windows clouded with decades of mountain grime. Yet something about it seemed alive, despite the obvious abandonment. The golden light Elijah had glimpsed from a distance now appeared to emanate from within, filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. He hesitated at the bottom of the crumbling steps, a strange fluttering in his stomach. Grandpa Mason's voice seemed to whisper on the breeze. Some places hold more than memories, boy. Some places hold power. Elijah climbed the steps slowly, testing each one before trusting his weight. The porch boards creaked beneath his feet as he approached the double doors. One hung askew on rusted hinges. The other was secured by a heavy padlock crusted with verdigris. No getting in that way, he murmured to himself, disappointment welling up. He had come so far, drawn by something he couldn't name. To be stopped by a simple lock seemed wrong somehow. Elijah circled the building, searching for another entrance. The stained glass windows were mostly intact on this side, protected from the prevailing winds by the mountain itself. Through one broken pane, he could see dust motes dancing in shafts of colored light. At the back of the church, he found a smaller door, probably once used by the preacher to enter directly near the pulpit. Its lock was broken, hanging uselessly from a splintered jamb. Evidence of animals, or perhaps desperate travelers seeking shelter. Pushing the door open, Elijah was greeted by a surprising absence of the musty decay he expected. Instead, the air inside felt warm, almost welcoming. He stepped across the threshold, his eyes slowly adjusting to the dim interior. The sanctuary was small, just 8 rows of pews facing a simple wooden pulpit. Hymnals lay scattered, as if the congregation had departed in haste. Above, the ceiling rose to wooden rafters where barn swallows had built nests, their soft chirping the only sound. "Hello," Elijah called, his voice echoing. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to announce himself in an abandoned building. Perhaps because it didn't feel abandoned at all. He moved carefully down the center aisle, touching the smooth, worn wood of the pews. Generations of hands had polished them to a soft glow. Near the front, he noticed a small brass plate, in memory of Thomas Jenkins, lost in the darkness, found in the light, 1924. The mining accident of 24. Grandpa had told him about that too. 37 men lost, the worst disaster before the '62 collapse that closed the Old North Shaft for good. At the pulpit, Elijah found an open Bible, its pages yellow with age but somehow preserved. The text was marked at Psalms. He brought them out of darkness, the utter darkness, and broke away their chains, a miner's verse. A promise of light in the darkness. To the right of the pulpit stood a small door, likely leading to a sacristy or storage room. On a hook beside it hung an ancient iron key, its design elaborate for such a simple church. Without thinking, Elijah took it down, its weight substantial in his palm. Something about holding the key felt right, as if he'd been meant to find it. He slid it into the lock of the sacristy door, surprised when it turned easily, without the resistance of rust or disuse. The room beyond was small, windowless, yet somehow not dark. A soft glow seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Shelves lined with old bottles, boxes of candles, and church records filled one wall. A small table held what must have been communion supplies, tarnished silver cups and plates, but it was the church register that drew Elijah's attention. The large, leather-bound book lay open on a reading stand, its pages filled with names written in various hands over the decades. He ran his finger down the columns: births, deaths, baptisms, marriages. Names he recognized from the hollow appeared throughout: Miller, Jenkins, Williams, and there, near the bottom of a page dated 1921, Mason. William Henry, son of Thomas and Eleanor, his grandfather's baptismal record. Elijah felt a chill, despite the unusual warmth of the room. His family had history here. This wasn't just any abandoned church. This was part of his own story. A sudden movement caught his eye, a flicker of light, reflecting off something in the sanctuary. He stepped back through the doorway, scanning the room. There, near the altar, something gleamed with a light that couldn't be explained by the dim sunlight filtering through dirty windows. Drawn forward, Elijah moved toward the mysterious gleam, unaware that with each step, he was walking deeper into the miracle that would change everything. The gleam that caught Elijah's eye came from beneath the altar, a fragment of stained glass no bigger than his palm, lying among the dust and debris. Unlike the dull, grimy windows, this piece shone as if freshly polished, catching light that seemed to have no source. Elijah knelt and carefully picked it up. The glass was warm to the touch, vibrating slightly like something alive. Its colors, deep blue at the center fading to amber at the edges, swirled and shifted as he turned it in his hand. The fragment depicted what appeared to be a flowing stream or river, the blue glass representing water. "Not possible," he whispered, looking around for a broken window that might have been its source. But the stained glass windows, though dirty, remained intact, their biblical scenes complete. As he held the fragment, memories of his grandfather's stories flooded back. Winter evenings by the coal stove, the old man's voice low and reverent as he spoke of the mountain church. They built it atop the springboy. The waters came before the church, before the mines, before our people ever set foot here. The Cherokee knew about it, called it the weeping of the mountain, said it could wash away sickness. Elijah had dismissed these as just stories, like so many mountain legends: ghost lights in the mines, Tommyknockers warning of cave-ins, women who could talk to birds. But holding this inexplicable glowing glass, he wasn't so sure anymore. He slipped the fragment into his pocket and continued exploring the church. The dust motes that had been lazily drifting in the sunbeams now seemed to move with purpose, swirling against gravity in slow, deliberate spirals. Elijah watched, transfixed, as they formed patterns in the air, almost like writing, though in no language he could understand. A faint sound reached his ears, so soft he thought he might have imagined it. He held his breath, listening. There it was again, singing. A single voice, neither male nor female, singing words he couldn't quite make out. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hello," he called again, his voice cracking slightly. "Is someone here?" The singing stopped. The church fell silent, except for the rustle of swallows in the rafters. Drawn by an impulse he couldn't explain, Elijah approached the altar. It was a simple wooden structure carved with crosses and wheat sheaves. Unlike the pews, which were clearly machine-made, the altar had the uneven character of something crafted by hand. With love, rather than precision, he ran his fingers along its edge, feeling the smoothness worn by years of reverent touches. The wood was warm, like the glass fragment, as if the altar retained the heat of long-extinguished candles. Kneeling beside it, Elijah noticed a slight gap between the altar and the floor, too regular to be settling or accident. He pressed gently on the front panel, and with a soft click, a small drawer slid open. Inside lay a leather-bound Bible, even older than the one on the pulpit, its cover worn to butter softness. Carefully, he lifted it out. The book fell open naturally to a page marked with a pressed mountain laurel blossom, perfectly preserved despite what must have been decades. Handwritten notes filled the margins in faded brown ink. Names and dates alongside mysterious annotations. Waters rose 3 feet after. Jenkins' boy healed, read one. Note beside Psalm 107, light seen by all present, said another next to John 9. And there, by Isaiah, Mason girl, consumption cured entirely. Elijah's heart quickened. Mason girl. Could it have been a relative? His grandmother had died before he was born, but he knew little about her or her family. As he pondered this connection, the singing began again. Closer this time, as if the singer stood just behind him. He turned quickly, but the church remained empty. Yet the voice continued, clearer now. Beneath the rock, beneath the root, where darkness meets the light. The words made no sense, yet seemed profoundly important. Elijah stood, still holding the Bible, and turned slowly in place. As he faced the altar again, a shaft of golden light, brighter than any sunbeam, shot through the church, illuminating the floor directly before the altar. There, revealed in the unnatural light, was the outline of a trap-door, its edges nearly invisible against the floorboards. A metal ring-pull lay flush against the wood, tarnished to the same color as the floor and all but invisible until this moment. The stained glass in his pocket grew warmer, and the singing swelled to a gentle crescendo, then faded. The beam of light remained, a spotlight on what lay hidden beneath this sacred place. With trembling fingers, Elijah slipped the Bible into his jacket and knelt before the trapdoor. Something waited below, something connected to the glass, the light, the singing, and perhaps even to his own family's past. Taking a deep breath, he grasped the metal ring. The trapdoor lifted with surprising ease, as if the hinges had been recently oiled rather than neglected for decades. Cool, moist air wafted up from below, carrying a mineral scent, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but ancient and somehow clean. Elijah peered into the darkness. Stone steps descended about 6 feet to what appeared to be a small chamber carved directly into the mountain bedrock beneath the church. The golden light that had revealed the trapdoor now illuminated the chamber below, though Elijah still couldn't discern its source. "Hello?" he called down, his voice echoing strangely. "Anyone there?" Silence answered him, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The stained glass fragment in his pocket had grown warmer still, not uncomfortably so, but as if responding to proximity to something important. Taking a deep breath, Elijah placed his foot on the first step. The stone was smooth, worn by countless feet over the years. Though who would have used this hidden stairway and why remained a mystery. The chamber below was roughly circular, about 12 feet across, its walls the natural limestone of the mountain. A stone shelf had been carved into one wall, upon which rested several objects: candle stubs, a small wooden cross, and what appeared to be a leather medicine pouch of Native American design. But what caught Elijah's eye was the weathered Bible placed precisely in the center of the shelf. Unlike the one he'd found in the altar drawer, this Bible was massive, a family Bible meant to record generations of births, deaths, and marriages. Its cover was elaborately tooled leather, the pages edged in what might have once been gold leaf. With reverent hands, Elijah lifted the heavy book and placed it on a flat stone that served as a kind of table in the center of the chamber. The Bible fell open naturally to pages filled with handwritten entries. The ink faded, but still legible in the mysterious light. The first entries dated back to 1843, when the church was founded, this place chosen for the presence of the healing waters. May it serve God's children in body and spirit. As he scanned down the pages, familiar hollow names appeared: Jenkins, Williams, Cooper, Miller. And there, in careful script, Mason family brought into the covenant of protection. 1879, beneath that entry, in different handwriting, Eleanor Mason, consumption healed by the waters. 1918, his great-grandmother, Elijah's fingers traced the words. The Mason girl from the other Bible's margin notes must have been her. But what did it mean, healed by the waters? And what covenant of protection? Further down the page, more recent entries spoke of visitations and light manifestations, particularly after the mine disasters. The last entry was dated just weeks before the final mine collapse in 1962, after which the church had been abandoned. Waters rising. The veil grows thin. They sing more loudly now. Elijah shivered despite the strange warmth of the chamber. Who were they? What was singing? The same voice he'd heard upstairs? As if in answer to his unspoken questions, a chorus of whispers suddenly filled the chamber, multiple voices speaking words he couldn't quite catch, like conversation heard through a thick wall. He spun around, but the room remained empty save for himself. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, though no more intelligible. The air in the chamber began to shimmer, like heat rising from summer pavement. "Who's there?" Elijah demanded, backing toward the stairs. "What do you want?" The voices abruptly ceased. The shimmering air stilled. The silence that followed felt expectant, as if the very space were waiting for something. Hesitantly, Elijah returned to the Bible. The final pages contained not family records, but what appeared to be instructions, written in the same hand as the last dated entry. "When the waters rise again, one will come who can hear their song. The cup must be used as before. The light must be carried out to those in need." The circle unbroken. Below these cryptic words was a crude map showing the church, the hollow, and what appeared to be an underground stream running beneath both. A spot was marked beneath the center of the church with the words, "The Source." As Elijah studied the map, a single beam of light, more focused than before, shot down from above, illuminating not the Bible, but the stone floor beside the table. The beam moved slowly, as if directed by an unseen hand, until it revealed what Elijah had overlooked, a second, smaller trapdoor set into the floor of the chamber. Unlike the trapdoor above, this one bore elaborate carvings, concentric circles surrounding a central spiral. At the very center of the spiral was a small depression, shaped exactly like the stained glass fragment in Elijah's pocket. The whispers returned, a single phrase repeated in countless voices, "Open the way. Open the way." Heart pounding, Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew the glowing glass fragment. It pulsed now with blue-gold light, casting rippling patterns across the chamber walls like sunlight through water. He knelt beside the carved trapdoor and, with trembling fingers, placed the glass into the depression at the center of the spiral. The moment the glass fragment settled into the carved depression, it flared with blinding intensity. Elijah shielded his eyes as the blue-gold light spread along the spiral pattern, illuminating each carved circle until the entire trapdoor glowed. Then, with the sound of stone sliding against stone, the door began to open on its own. The whispers rose to a crescendo before falling silent once more. When Elijah lowered his hand, the trapdoor stood fully open, revealing a narrow shaft with rough-hewn steps descending into darkness. Unlike the chamber he stood in, these deeper passages had a crude, ancient feel, as if they predated not just the church, but perhaps even human habitation in these mountains. The glass fragment remained in its setting, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat, casting enough light to see the first few steps. Beyond that lay only darkness. Elijah hesitated. Grandpa Mason's warnings about the dangers beneath old mountains echoed in his memory. Sinkholes, abandoned mine shafts, underground gas pockets. Yet something told him this passage was different, not a natural formation or mining remnant, but something created with purpose. "Sadie needs medicine," he reminded himself, touching the silver dollar in his pocket. He had come seeking ginseng, but perhaps he'd found something more valuable. If the stories about healing waters were true, drawing a deep breath, Elijah began his descent. The stairway spiraled downward, each step worn smooth in the center from countless feet over unknown years. The walls were damp limestone, occasionally marked with symbols similar to those on the trapdoor above. As he descended, the air grew cooler but not stale. Rather, it felt fresh, carrying that same clean mineral scent he'd noticed before, after descending what felt like several stories. Though it was hard to judge distance in the spiraling passage, Elijah emerged into a much larger chamber. Here the darkness was broken by a soft blue luminescence that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Small crystals embedded in the limestone caught this light and reflected it, creating the impression of a chamber full of stars. But what took Elijah's breath away was the pool at the center of the chamber. Perfectly circular, perhaps 15 feet across, its water was crystalline and still as glass. The source of the blue light seemed to be the pool itself, glowing from within with gentle radiance. Approaching cautiously, Elijah knelt at the edge of the pool. The water was clear enough to see the bottom, perhaps 6 feet down, where white sand swirled in patterns around a central point where water bubbled up continuously, the spring that fed the pool. "The source," he whispered, recalling the map in the Bible as if in response to his voice. The blue glow intensified briefly before settling back to its previous luminescence. The surface of the water remained preternaturally still, despite the bubbling source below. Near the edge of the pool, half hidden in a small alcove carved into the rock, Elijah spotted a silver object, catching the blue light. Reaching carefully, he retrieved an old silver communion cup, its surface tarnished but still beautiful, engraved with the same spiral pattern as the trapdoor above. The moment his fingers closed around the cup, the whispers returned, more clearly now, as if proximity to the pool somehow translated their meaning. The waters heal. The waters reveal. The waters remember. Elijah nearly dropped the cup in surprise. These weren't just meaningless whispers. They were trying to communicate something specific. "What waters?" he asked aloud, feeling foolish but compelled to respond. "This pool." The surface of the water rippled, though nothing had touched it. The blue glow brightened, and beneath the surface, Elijah could now make out shapes forming in the sand. Letters, words, slowly spelled out by the moving granules. "Yes," he scrambled backward, heart pounding. This was beyond strange lights or mysterious singing. This was direct communication with what? The mountain itself. Some presence dwelling in the waters? As his panic subsided, curiosity took its place. If the waters could communicate, perhaps they could also explain. The Bible mentioned healing. "My great-grandmother, others from the hollow." Is that true? The sand swirled again. "Since before your people came, and you can heal my sister." "Sadie? She's sick, her lungs. Bring her the water, I can take some with me." Elijah held up the silver cup questioningly. The water's surface rippled in concentric circles, and the blue glow concentrated beneath the cup in his hand, as if pointing to it. "Use this vessel slowly, reverently." Elijah dipped the cup into the luminous water. As it filled, the liquid began to glow more intensely within the silver vessel, casting blue-white light across his face and the chamber walls. When he lifted the cup, the water inside continued to glow, somehow retaining its luminescence, even separated from the pool. It felt warm against his palms, the silver cup vibrating subtly like the glass fragment had done. "Thank you," Elijah said softly. Unsure whom or what he was thanking, the sand at the bottom of the pool swirled one last time. "Return when needed." The blue glow began to fade, the whispers receding like an outgoing tide. Elijah sensed that whatever communication had been possible was now concluding, at least for now, carefully holding the glowing cup. He made his way back to the spiral staircase, his path now lit by the water he carried. His mind raced with questions, but one certainty remained. He needed to get this water to Sadie. Everything else, the mystery of the church, the nature of the spring, the voices could wait. Hope, bright as the glowing water, filled his heart as he climbed back toward the world above, emerging from the church into the late afternoon light. Elijah blinked at the changed quality of the world above. Everything seemed both sharper and somehow less substantial than the chamber below, as if the underground spring held a deeper reality than the sunlit mountain. He had carefully transferred the glowing water from the silver cup to a mason jar found in the church kitchen, wrapping the jar in his threadbare scarf to conceal its luminescence. The cup itself he had reluctantly left behind, placing it reverently beside the family Bible in the first chamber. It felt wrong to remove it from the church, as if the cup belonged there as surely as the altar or the pews. The descent from Poor Mountain was quicker than the ascent had been, though Elijah's mind moved slowly, struggling to process everything he'd experienced. The singing voices, the communicating water, the records of healing, it all seemed impossible in the rational light of day. Yet the jar in his pocket glowed with undeniable reality, its warmth seeping through the fabric against his thigh. As Elijah neared the bottom of the mountain path where it joined the main road, he nearly collided with Dr. Pearson's Ford truck, rattling up from the direction of the hollow. The doctor pulled alongside, dust billowing around his vehicle. "Elijah Mason, what in heaven's name are you doing all the way up here by yourself?" Elijah instinctively pressed a hand over the pocket containing the glowing water. "Just looking for ginseng, sir." "For Sadie's medicine." Dr. Pearson's weathered face softened. He was a good man, everyone agreed, doing his best for the Hollow's residents, despite limited resources and even more limited payment. "I've just been to see your sister. That cough's getting worse, son. She needs real treatment, antibiotics, maybe even a stay at the county hospital." "Is she—" Elijah's voice caught. "How bad?" "I won't lie to you, son. It's serious. Your pa's fever is broken at least, but Sadie—" The doctor shook his head. "Your ma says you've gone for ginseng, but even if you found some, it wouldn't fetch enough for what she needs." Elijah straightened, feeling the jar's warmth against his side. "I found something better, sir." Dr. Pearson raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He'd practiced medicine in these mountains long enough to respect certain mysteries. "Well, you'd best hurry home then." Before dark, as the doctor's truck disappeared around the bend, Elijah quickened his pace. The sun was already slipping behind the western ridge, casting long shadows across the valley. By the time he reached the outskirts of the hollow, twilight had deepened to dusk. The contrast between the ethereal church and the harsh reality of Coleridge Hollow had never been starker. Shacks and small houses huddled against the hillsides, most with porches sagging under the weight of generations of hard living. Clothing lines stretched between posts, the day's laundry stiffening in the evening chill. From somewhere came the sound of a baby crying, quickly hushed. As Elijah passed the Miller house, Pastor Miller stepped out onto his porch. "Find any ginseng up there, boy?" "No, sir," Elijah answered truthfully. "But I found the old church you mentioned." The pastor's expression shifted subtly. "Did you now? And did you go inside?" Something in his tone made Elijah hesitate. "Just for a minute," he lied, unsure why he felt the need to conceal his discovery. "It was getting late." Pastor Miller nodded slowly. "Best to leave old things be sometimes, especially that place." He seemed about to say more, then simply added, "Your ma's been watching the road for you. Better get on home." The mason cabin was the smallest on the row, set back against the hillside as if trying to disappear into the mountain itself. A faint light glowed from the window. They were using precious kerosene rather than sitting in darkness, a sign of his mother's worry. As Elijah approached, the door flew open. His mother stood silhouetted against the lamplight, her thin shoulders sagging with relief at the sight of him. "Elijah James Mason, where have you been? It's nearly full dark." "I'm sorry, Ma, I got distracted." He climbed the 3 steps to the porch and lowered his voice. "How's Sadie?" Ruth Mason's face tightened. "The same. Maybe worse. Dr. Pearson says, I know. I saw him on the road." Elijah glanced past her into the cabin. "Is she awake?" "In and out. The fever makes her dream." His mother touched his cheek gently. "Did you find anything to help?" Elijah patted his pocket where the jar rested. "Maybe, but it's not ginseng, Ma. It's something else." "What do you mean, something else?" His father's voice came from inside the cabin, stronger than it had been in weeks. Stepping inside, Elijah saw his father sitting up in his chair by the stove. Some color returned to his gaunt face. The broken leg was still propped on a stool, but William Mason's eyes were clear for the first time since the accident. "The doctor gave me something for the infection," his father explained, noting Elijah's surprise. "But Sadie needs more than he can provide." His gaze sharpened. "What have you found, son?" Elijah glanced between his parents, these people who had always trusted in what they could see and touch. Coal in the hand, food on the table, the tangible reality of daily survival. How could he explain water that glowed and spoke, a church that sang, a miracle waiting beneath the mountain? "I need to show you," he said finally, reaching for the jar in his pocket. "And you need to believe." The glowing water cast strange shadows across the cabin walls as Elijah unwrapped the mason jar. His parents stared in stunned silence at the impossible blue-white luminescence, their faces transformed in its otherworldly light. "What in God's name is that?" William Mason finally whispered, making the sign of the cross almost unconsciously. "Water," Elijah said simply. "From a spring under the old church on Poor Mountain." "Water doesn't glow like that," his mother protested, though her eyes never left the jar. "It ain't natural." Elijah carefully placed the jar on the table between them. The Bible in the church had entries about healing. Great-Grandma Eleanor was healed there, Ma. It mentioned her by name. His father frowned. "My grandmother? She had consumption as a girl, that's true. The story was always that she recovered at a mountain sanatorium." "No, Pa, it was the water from this spring." Elijah's voice grew more confident as he spoke. "And there were others from the hollow. Jenkins, Williams, others. All healed." Ruth Mason's practical nature reasserted itself. "That's just mountain superstition, Elijah. Like ghost lights in the mines or granny women's charms." But her eyes lingered on the glowing jar with unmistakable longing. From the back room came the sound of Sadie's labored breathing, punctuated by a weak, rattling cough. William Mason's weathered face hardened with decision. "The doctor says she's getting worse. His medicine costs more than we can earn in 3 months, even if I could work." He looked at the glowing jar, then at his wife. "What have we got to lose?" Ruth hesitated, torn between desperate hope and lifelong practicality. "If it was found in a church," she said finally, "it can't be of the devil. And if it does nothing, we're no worse off." She reached for the jar. "I'll give it to her." "No," Elijah said quickly, pulling the jar back. "I should do it. It chose me somehow to bring it here." His parents exchanged glances, but didn't argue. Together, the three of them moved to Sadie's bedside. The little girl lay still, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Her face was flushed with fever, dark circles shadowing her closed eyes. Even unconscious, her expression held the strain of constant effort, the work of breathing through fluid-filled lungs. Elijah carefully unscrewed the jar. The glow intensified as the lid came off, and a subtle scent filled the room, clean and mineral, like the first rainfall after drought. He gently lifted Sadie's head with one hand. "Just a sip," he murmured, bringing the jar to her pale lips. The water flowed seemingly of its own accord, a small amount slipping between her lips. For a moment nothing happened. Then Sadie gasped, her eyes flying open. The gasp became a deep, clear breath, the first easy breath she'd drawn in months. "It's cool," she whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Like drinking starlight." Ruth's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. William gripped the bedpost so hard his knuckles whitened. No one spoke as Sadie took another deep breath, then another, each one stronger and clearer than the last. "I feel lighter," she said wonderingly. Then her eyelids fluttered, and she slipped back into sleep, but a natural, peaceful sleep. Her breathing deep and regular, Elijah carefully screwed the lid back onto the jar, which still glowed with undiminished light. "We should save the rest," he said softly. "In case she needs more." His mother touched Sadie's forehead. "The fever's breaking already," she whispered. "I can feel it." William Mason's eyes shone with unshed tears. "What happened up there, son? What really happened in that church?" Elijah started to answer, then stopped as he noticed something through the small window beside Sadie's bed. Outside, where there should have been only darkness, faint lights were moving on the hillside, not the warm yellow of lanterns, but the same blue-white glow as the water in the jar. "Look," he breathed, pointing. His parents joined him at the window. The lights moved in slow, deliberate patterns across the forested slope of Poor Mountain, as if tracing invisible paths. "Ghost lights," William murmured. "But I've never seen them on this side of the mountain before." "Not ghosts, Pa," Elijah said with sudden certainty. "They're connected to the spring somehow. To what's happening here." Ruth Mason, practical to her core, surprised them both. "They're keeping watch," she said softly. "Making sure it works." The three stood vigil by the window as the mysterious lights continued their silent procession across the hillside. Inside, Sadie slept peacefully, her breathing growing stronger by the hour. Near midnight, she woke briefly. Ruth brought her broth, which she sipped eagerly, the first food she'd managed in days. Afterward, instead of falling back into fevered dreams, Sadie asked for paper and her colored pencils. "I need to draw them before I forget," she explained drowsily. "Draw what, sweetheart?" her mother asked. "The singing people," Sadie murmured, already sketching with surprising energy. "The ones who brought me back." On the paper, childish yet somehow precise, emerged figures of light with outstretched hands. Behind them rose the unmistakable outline of the old church on Poor Mountain, its steeple reaching toward a star-filled sky. By morning, Sadie was sitting up in bed. Color returned to her cheeks, breathing clear and strong. The Mason family had agreed to keep the source of her recovery private. Some things weren't meant to be shouted from rooftops, Ruth insisted, but in a hollow where each family's business inevitably became everyone's knowledge. Such miracles couldn't stay hidden for long. It started with Mrs. Jenkins from 2 cabins down, bringing a jar of apple butter as an excuse to check on the family. She'd heard Sadie coughing through the thin walls for months, a sound familiar to anyone who'd watched loved ones struggle with miner's lung or consumption. When she saw the girl sitting up, chattering away as she hadn't done in weeks, her eyes widened. "Lord above, what happened to this child?" she asked, not bothering to disguise her shock. Ruth gave the answer they'd prepared. "Her fever broke. Dr. Pearson's medicine finally took hold." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, but her eyes settled on Sadie's drawing pinned to the wall, the glowing figures and the old church. "That's interesting artwork for a little girl," she remarked. "Reminds me of stories my grandma used to tell about the mountain folk before our time." By afternoon, 3 more neighbors had found reasons to visit. By evening, Dr. Pearson himself arrived, summoned by concerned whispers that the Mason girl had either miraculously recovered or passed away in the night. The doctor examined Sadie with increasing bewilderment, listening to her chest, checking her temperature, noting her clear eyes and normal color. "This is remarkable," he finally said, packing away his stethoscope. "Last night, I would have wagered she'd need hospitalization within days. Today, her lungs sound clearer than mine." He looked at Ruth and William. "What exactly happened?" William shifted uncomfortably. "Like my wife told the neighbors, the fever broke, and she turned the corner." Dr. Pearson's gaze moved to Elijah, who tried to maintain a neutral expression, then to the mason jar sitting inconspicuously on the shelf, covered with a cloth that didn't quite hide its faint glow. "I've practiced medicine in these mountains for 30 years, the doctor said carefully. "I've seen things science can't easily explain, things tied to the land itself." He nodded toward the hidden jar. "Whatever you found up there, it worked where my medicine failed. I won't pry further." As the doctor left, Elijah noticed Pastor Miller standing across the dirt road, watching the Mason cabin with an unreadable expression. The next morning, the Covington County Gazette arrived in Mrs. Williams' mailbox. The widow, who managed the Hollow's informal postal service, brought the paper directly to the Mason cabin, her finger marking a small article on page 3. "Local girls, miraculous recovery baffles physician." The article was brief, just a paragraph noting that Sadie Mason, 8 of Coleridge Hollow had made an unexpected and complete recovery from a serious respiratory illness that had resisted conventional treatment. Dr. Pearson was quoted as saying the case defied medical explanation, though he cautioned against premature conclusions. "I never spoke to any reporter," Dr. Pearson protested when confronted later that day. It emerged that Jim Hendricks, who drove the county's only taxi and served as the Gazette's stringers for outlying areas, had overheard the doctor discussing the case at the diner in Bristol. By Sunday, the small church at the mouth of the hollow was buzzing with speculation. The Mason family arrived to find themselves the center of unwanted attention, with congregants making space for them in the front pew rather than their usual spot near the back. Pastor Miller's sermon, unexpectedly, made no mention of miracles or healing. Instead, he spoke about the dangers of seeking signs and wonders, the importance of tested faith over superstition. "Not everything unexplained is miraculous," he cautioned, his gaze settling briefly on Elijah, "and not every miracle is meant to be understood by all." After the service, several church members approached to see Sadie for themselves. Mrs. Cooper, who'd lost 2 children to influenza in 19, touched the girl's hair with trembling fingers. "Just like my Esther's," she whispered, tears in her eyes. Mr. Jenkins, whose arthritis had confined him to a wheelchair for 5 years, caught Elijah's sleeve as the family tried to leave. "Boy," he said in a low voice, "they say you found something up on Poor Mountain, something that healed your sister where doctors couldn't." Before Elijah could respond, a well-dressed stranger stepped forward, Raymond Porter from the Bristol Regional Times, according to the press card in his hatband. Unlike the Gazette, the Times was a real newspaper with readers across 3 states. "Young man," the reporter said, notebook already in hand, "I'd like to ask you about this miracle everyone's talking about. Is it true your sister was near death just days ago?" Elijah looked helplessly at his parents. They had wanted privacy, normalcy. Instead, their family's most intimate struggle and relief had become public spectacle. The reporter followed his gaze. "Or perhaps I could speak with your parents. Or the girl herself?" He smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Human interest stories like this sell papers, son. Folks love a good miracle." From his pocket, Porter produced a camera with a flash attachment. "How about a photograph of the miracle girl? Maybe with that interesting drawing she made." William Mason had stepped between the reporter and his family with surprising steadiness for a man still favoring a healing leg. "No photographs," he said firmly, "and no story. My daughter's health isn't for public consumption, but the damage was done." By Wednesday, 3 more reporters had found their way to Coleridge Hollow. A television crew from Roanoke set up equipment at the hollow's entrance before the company men ran them off private mining property. The attention brought something worse than inconvenience. Strangers began appearing, desperate people drawn by rumors of healing. A mother from Johnson County arrived with a child suffering from polio. An elderly man came seeking relief from cancer that had eaten away half his face beneath a soiled bandage. "Please," they begged on the Mason's doorstep. "Just a little of what helped your girl." The remaining glowing water stayed hidden in its jar, saved for Sadie should she relapse. But Elijah felt the weight of each turning away, each desperate face sent home without hope. On the 7th night after Sadie's healing, as another hopeful stranger was gently but firmly turned away, Pastor Miller appeared at their door. "This can't continue," he said without preamble. "The hollow wasn't meant for this kind of attention. Neither was your family." He lowered his voice. "Neither was the church on Poor Mountain." Inside the cabin, over coffee that did little to ward off the spring evening's chill, the pastor revealed what he knew. The church was built in the 1840s by my great-grandfather and other miners who'd discovered the spring while digging an exploratory shaft. They believed it was sacred, a gift meant to serve the community in times of great need. His weathered fingers traced the rim of his cup. But word spread then, too. Outsiders came, tried to bottle and sell the water, claim the land. There was violence. People died, so they closed the church. Ruth asked. Pastor Miller nodded. They concealed the spring, restricted knowledge of its power to certain families, certain elders, used it only in dire circumstances. He looked at Elijah. Until the mine collapse of 62 damaged the main passage. We thought the spring was lost forever. Until I found it, Elijah said softly. Yes. The pastor studied him. The old story said it would be so, that when the need was greatest, someone would be called to rediscover the way. His gaze moved to Sadie's drawing on the wall. Someone who could hear them. The singing people, Sadie said from the doorway of her room, where she'd been listening. They're still waiting for us to come back. Pastor Miller's expression grew troubled. These outsiders seeking healing, they'll keep coming unless we give them something. But we can't risk the spring becoming public knowledge again. What are you suggesting? William asked. A small group, just a few from the hollow with the greatest need. We follow Elijah back to the church. The pastor met each of their eyes in turn. One visit, one chance for healing. Then we seal it up again. Keep the secret safe for another generation. The decision wasn't easy, but by dawn, a plan had formed. 7 people from Coleridge Hollow would make the journey. Pastor Miller, the Masons minus Sadie, who would stay with Mrs. Williams, Mr. Jenkins in his wheelchair, Mrs. Cooper's grandson Tommy, whose leukemia had returned after remission, Widow Harmon, blind from glaucoma, and old Mr. Lewis, whose miner's lung had him breathing through an oxygen tank. Elijah spent the morning sketching a map of the path to the church. His neat pencil lines marked the turn at Lightning Oak, the crossing at Deer Creek, the final approach through a stand of ancient hemlocks. Simple enough on paper, but as they gathered at the hollow's edge near noon, doubt crept in. What if I can't find it again? He whispered to his father, as Mr. Jenkins was loaded into a makeshift litter for the steepest parts of the climb. What if it's gone? William squeezed his son's shoulder. Faith, boy. If it called you once, it'll welcome you back. The journey was harder than Elijah remembered. Spring rains had washed out portions of the trail, forcing detours through dense underbrush. The adults tired quickly, especially those already weakened by illness. What should have been a 2-hour climb stretched past 4 as the group stopped frequently to rest. The path seems different. Elijah fretted as they paused beneath a lightning-scarred oak that might or might not have been the landmark from his map. The mountain changes, Pastor Miller said enigmatically. It tests resolve. By late afternoon, doubt had infected the group. Tommy's mother wept quietly as the boy's strength flagged. Mr. Lewis wheezed alarmingly despite rationing his oxygen. Even Elijah's father, whose leg had been improving daily, began to limp more pronouncedly. Maybe we should turn back, Ruth suggested, looking at the weakening members of their party with concern. Try another day. No, Widow Harmon said suddenly, her milky eyes seeming to focus on something the others couldn't see. We're close. I can hear it. Hear what? Elijah asked. The old woman's face softened. Singing, just like your sister Drew. Can't you hear it? One by one, the group fell silent, straining to listen. And there, just at the edge of perception, came the faintest melody, carried on a breeze that hadn't been blowing moments before. Elijah felt the stained glass fragment, which he'd brought from home, grow warm in his pocket. This way, he said with sudden certainty, leading them up a slope he hadn't noticed before. As they crested the ridge, the mist parted like a curtain drawn aside by invisible hands. There stood the church, its weathered boards somehow straighter than Elijah remembered, its windows clearer. The entire structure bathed in that same golden light he'd seen on his first visit. My God, Pastor Miller whispered. It's exactly as my grandfather described it. The interior of the church had transformed since Elijah's first visit. Dust no longer coated the pews. Hymnals sat neatly arranged, and sunlight, though the day was overcast, streamed through windows that now gleamed with vivid stained glass scenes of flowing water and outstretched hands. This isn't possible, Ruth whispered, running her fingers over a polished pew that had been splintered and neglected days before. Who could have done this? Pastor Miller moved slowly toward the altar, his expression a mixture of awe and recognition. My grandfather said it changed when needed, that the church itself responded to faith. He turned to the group gathered hesitantly at the entrance. This is a sacred moment, a private miracle. Whatever happens here stays within our community. Tommy's mother clutched her son's thin hand. Will it hurt him? The healing? No, Elijah said with certainty. It feels like drinking starlight. That's what Sadie said. Mr. Lewis took a labored breath from his oxygen tank. I don't care if it hurts. Drowning in my own lungs hurts worse. The old miner's eyes watered. Whether from emotion or disease was unclear. I just want to breathe free once more before I die. One by one, they moved further into the sanctuary. Widow Harmon walked with unexpected sureness, as if the place itself guided her steps despite her blindness. Mr. Jenkins, lifted from his litter to a pew, marveled at the sensation of warmth flowing into his twisted joints. Elijah led them to the trapdoor near the altar, which now opened at the lightest touch of his hand. The carved stairway beyond appeared freshly hewn, illuminated by a soft glow that pulsed in welcome. I'll go first, he said. Then help the others down. The hidden chamber had expanded, the rough cave now a smooth grotto, large enough to accommodate them all comfortably. The stone shelf held not just candles and the communion cup, but small glass vials arranged in neat rows, perfect for collecting water from the spring. Pastor Miller lifted one reverently, just like in my grandfather's journal. They called them Tears of the Mountain. The trapdoor leading to the deepest level, to the spring itself, now stood open, the spiral staircase beyond wider and less steep than Elijah remembered. Even Mr. Jenkins could be carefully carried down by William and Pastor Miller. When they reached the glowing pool, gasps of wonder echoed against the crystal-studded walls. The blue luminescence had intensified, bright enough now to cast their shadows against the stone. What do we do? Tommy's mother asked, her voice hushed. Elijah reached for the silver communion cup, which waited on the stone edge of the pool, as if placed there for their arrival. We drink, he said simply, and we believe. One by one they approached the pool. Elijah filled the cup and offered it first to Tommy, whose small face appeared skull-like in the blue glow. The boy sipped tentatively, then more deeply, his eyes widening. It tastes like summer, he whispered. Next came Mr. Lewis, who removed his oxygen mask with trembling hands. After drinking, he took a deep breath, his first unaided in years, and began to weep openly. Widow Harmon drank, then blinked rapidly, as if adjusting to sudden brightness. The shadows, she murmured. They're lifting. Mr. Jenkins' transformation was the most dramatic. Minutes after drinking, he pushed himself up from his seat, standing unsteadily but definitely standing for the first time in half a decade. As each person received the water, they filled one of the small glass vials to take home, a reserve against future need. Elijah carefully instructed them, just a few drops at a time. Use it sparingly. It's not meant to be wasted or shared beyond your immediate family. Pastor Miller was the last to drink. Unlike the others, he showed no physical change, though his eyes seemed to brighten with renewed purpose. This gift carries responsibility, he told them. We are its stewards, not its owners. While the others marveled at their healing, Dr. Pearson, who had insisted on joining the group despite his scientific skepticism, collected water samples in his medical vials, methodically labeling each. I need to understand what's happening, he explained when Elijah looked concerned. If this is real, it has properties that could revolutionize medicine. It's not for studying, Pastor Miller warned. Our ancestors learned that lesson the hard way. The doctor's expression hardened slightly. People are suffering beyond this hollow, Reverend. If this water can truly heal, keeping its secret borders on criminal, and exploiting it would destroy it, the pastor countered. This isn't some mineral spring to be bottled and sold. It's a covenant between the mountain and its people. Others joined the debate. Tommy's mother argued passionately that children everywhere deserved access to such healing. Mr. Lewis countered that outsiders would drain the spring dry through greed and desperation. Ruth Mason suggested a middle path, controlled access for those in greatest need, administered by the church. As voices rose, the blue glow of the pool began to pulse erratically. The water's surface, previously mirror-still, rippled with increasing agitation. "Stop!" Elijah said, but no one heard him over the argument. Then, suddenly, the light dimmed. The singing voices that had been a constant, subtle presence fell silent. The water stilled, but its glow had diminished to a fraction of its former brilliance. "Now look what you've done," Widow Harmon said. Her newly clearing vision fixed accusingly on the doctor and his collection of samples. "Your doubting has offended it." The subdued group emerged from the church into early evening, each changed in ways beyond the physical healings they'd received. Tommy walked without assistance for the first time in months. Mr. Lewis had left his oxygen tank behind. Widow Harmon marveled at the colors of the sunset. Mr. Jenkins took careful, reverent steps on legs that had been useless that morning. No one spoke of what had happened when the spring dimmed. The weight of responsibility had settled over them, a covenant as binding as any legal document. As they began their descent, headlights appeared on the logging road below, multiple vehicles climbing toward them with purpose. "Who would be coming up here at this hour?" Ruth asked. Pastor Miller's face darkened. "Someone followed us." 3 vehicles came into view, a Coleridge Mining Company truck leading, followed by a county sheriff's cruiser and a sleek Cadillac with Bristol plates. They parked at the widest point of the road, and men in suits emerged, looking up at the church with calculating eyes. "That's Harold Blackburn," William whispered, recognizing the mine superintendent. "And Judge Whitaker with him." A man with a surveyor's transit and stake markers disembarked from the truck. Without acknowledging the church group, he began taking measurements and sighting lines toward the church. "What's the meaning of this?" Pastor Miller called as they reached the road. Judge Whitaker stepped forward, a document case tucked under his arm. "Evening, Reverend. Quite a party you've got here." His eyes flickered over the obviously improved conditions of those who had been gravely ill hours before. "Just visiting the old church," the pastor replied carefully. "A historical interest." Historical indeed. Whitaker opened his case and withdrew a map. "This church sits on land for which Coleridge Mining holds mineral rights dating back to 1898, rights that permit access for extraction at any time." William Mason stepped forward. "This is sacred ground, Judge, a place of worship." "An abandoned building," corrected the man from the Cadillac, introducing himself as Lawrence Mercer, legal counsel for Coleridge. "Unused for over 60 years, and therefore forfeit of any religious protection." He nodded toward the surveyor. "Recent geological surveys indicate a significant coal seam directly beneath this site. Most accessible from this elevation. The implication hung heavy in the mountain air. The mine wanted to demolish the church to reach the coal beneath it, the very chamber that housed the spring. "You can't," Elijah blurted. "There's something important down there." Mercer's eyebrows rose with interest. "Oh, and what might that be, young man?" Pastor Miller placed a warning hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Nothing of interest to a mining operation. Just old foundations." Sheriff Davis, who had remained by his cruiser until now, approached with apologetic discomfort. "Folks, I don't like this any more than you do. I was baptized in that church as a baby, but the law's clear on mineral rights, and the company's filed proper permits for preliminary survey work." "When?" Pastor Miller demanded. "When did these permits suddenly appear?" "Applied for this morning," the sheriff admitted. "Fast-tracked by the county commission due to potential economic impact." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The news of Sadie's recovery, the reporters, the increased attention to the hollow and the mountain, it had alerted someone to renewed activity around the old church. Someone connected enough to know the value of what might lie beneath. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat. "We understand this site may hold sentimental value for some hollow residents. The company is prepared to offer compensation, perhaps funding for a new church in the hollow proper." "It's not about the building," Tommy's mother said fiercely. "Look at my son. This morning he could barely walk." The mine superintendent's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Bennett, your husband works for Coleridge, does he not? On the 3rd shift?" The threat wasn't subtle. In a single industry community like Coleridge Hollow, opposing the mining company could mean not just unemployment, but eviction from company-owned housing. Pastor Miller recognized the leverage being applied. "We'll need to discuss this as a community," he said, trying to diffuse the situation. "Perhaps a town hall meeting?" "Of course," Mercer agreed smoothly. "However, the survey work begins tomorrow. Just measurements, you understand. No demolition yet." His smile never reached his eyes. "We've already staked the initial perimeter. Only then did Elijah notice the metal survey stakes hammered into the ground around the churchyard, forming a precise boundary around the building and extending toward where they knew the underground chambers lay." "1 week," Judge Whitaker pronounced. "The county commission will hold a special hearing on the complete extraction permit next Friday. Your community is welcome to present its case then." He glanced at his watch. "Though I should warn you, the economic arguments are quite compelling. 50 new jobs increased tax revenue as the officials returned to their vehicles." Widow Harmon, her eyes now clear enough to see the stakes surrounding the church, clutched Pastor Miller's arm. "They can't really take it, can they?" she whispered. "Not after what we've seen today." The pastor's face was grim as he watched the mine superintendent snap photos of the church with a Polaroid camera. "They can try," he said quietly. "But this place has survived threats before." That night, Elijah dreamed of water turning to blood, of machinery tearing into the chamber of the spring, of the singing voices crying out in pain. He woke gasping, the stained glass fragment burning hot against his chest where he'd begun wearing it on a cord. The message was clear. The church needed protection, and time was running out. Word traveled fast. By morning, a small crowd had gathered at the Hollows Community Center, the same room that hosted town meetings, Sunday school, and the occasional wedding reception. Pastor Miller stood before a hand-drawn map of Poor Mountain, explaining the mining company's plans. "They'll start with core samples," he explained, "then move to full extraction if approved. The entire church and surrounding area would be destroyed." "Let them have it," muttered Hank Collins, a shift supervisor at the mine. 50 new jobs means my boy doesn't have to leave the Hollow for work. And what about what happened up there?" countered Mr. Jenkins, standing straight for the first time in years. "You want to trade miracles for coal dust?" The room divided quickly. Those who had witnessed the healings versus those whose livelihoods depended on the mine's prosperity. Old tensions resurfaced, faith against practicality, tradition against progress, the seen against the unseen. Pastor Miller called for unity, but the cracks were already showing. In a community where every family had members on both sides of the divide, the conflict cut through blood ties. Midway through the meeting, a commotion at the door announced new arrivals. Dr. Pearson entered, accompanied by a tall, distinguished man carrying a leather briefcase. "This is Dr. Howard Mitchell from the University of Virginia Department of Anthropology," Dr. Pearson announced, "and Ms. Abigail Carter from the State Historical Preservation Office." The woman behind them nodded. "We came as soon as we received your message, Doctor." Pastor Miller's eyebrows rose. "You contacted outsiders?" "I contacted experts," Dr. Pearson corrected. "If we're going to save this site, we need more than just faith. We need documentation, historical significance." Professor Mitchell addressed the room. "I understand this is a sensitive situation, but if I may." When no one objected, he opened his briefcase and spread several old photographs on the table. These images from our archives show the church during construction in 1843. The sepia photos revealed men in period clothing raising timber frames. What caught Elijah's eye was a detail in the background. A small group of Cherokee observers standing at a respectful distance. The church was built on what the Cherokee considered sacred land, Mitchell explained. "According to our records, instead of the usual displacement, the early settlers incorporated indigenous knowledge of the site into their own spiritual practice, a remarkable case of cultural cooperation for that era." Ms. Carter added, "And our preliminary research suggests the church may have served as an underground railroad station during the Civil War. The hidden chambers beneath would have provided perfect Concealment, murmurs spread through the room. Historical significance could provide legal protection the community alone couldn't secure. We'd like to document the site immediately, Mitchell continued, before any industrial activity compromises its integrity. By noon, the church on Poor Mountain had become a hub of activity. University researchers photographed and measured every detail, while state preservation officials catalogued architectural features. Even a few journalists had arrived, drawn by the dual narrative of miraculous healings and historical discovery. Elijah stood apart, watching strangers swarm over the sacred space that had felt so private days earlier. The stained glass fragment hung warm against his chest, neither approving nor rejecting this new development. "Quite a stir you've caused." "Young man," said a voice beside him. Elijah turned to find an elderly woman he didn't recognize, not from the hollow, judging by her city clothes and the quality of her walking stick. "I didn't mean to," he replied honestly. She smiled. The most important discoveries rarely announce themselves in advance. She introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Wright, a hydrologist specializing in mountain springs. "Your Dr. Pearson sent me water samples. Most remarkable properties I've ever analyzed." Elijah tensed. "You tested the water?" "Mineral content only," she assured him. "Unusually high concentrations of lithium, selenium, and several rare earth elements, all known for therapeutic properties. Combined with the unique geological formation beneath this church." She shook her head in wonder. "Nature has created something science is only beginning to understand." Meanwhile, Professor Mitchell had set up a portable lightbox to examine old photographic plates discovered in the church records. One image in particular commanded attention, a panoramic view of the entire mountain taken in 1862, showing the church prominently positioned above what appeared to be a network of small structures connected by paths. "An entire community once existed here," Mitchell explained to the growing crowd, "centered around the church and presumably the spring beneath it." The researchers' enthusiasm grew as more connections emerged, architectural elements matching descriptions in Cherokee oral traditions, construction techniques unique to free black craftsmen of the period, geological formations that created natural acoustics beneath the church. This site represents a confluence of cultural, historical, and natural significance, Ms. Carter declared, already drafting preservation paperwork. "It clearly qualifies for emergency protection under state heritage laws." Hope flickered among those fighting to save the church. But as the afternoon waned, new vehicles appeared, Coleridge Mining Company trucks carrying drilling equipment and more survey teams. Lawrence Mercer, the company lawyer, strode into the church with a court order in hand. "This grants us right to conduct immediate geological assessment," he announced, handing copies to Ms. Carter and Professor Mitchell. "Your historical investigation can continue, but our survey work takes precedence under mineral rights statutes." Outside, workers began unloading core sampling equipment designed to drill deep into the mountain, directly toward the hidden spring. Pastor Miller gathered the hollow residents. "We need to pray," he said urgently, "and we need to decide how far we're willing to go to protect what's been entrusted to us." As tension mounted, Dr. Pearson pulled Elijah aside. "That reporter from the Bristol Times is back," he whispered, "and he's brought a television crew. This story is about to become much bigger than our hollow." The drilling began at dawn. The harsh, mechanical growl echoed through the mountain hollows, a sound that made Elijah wince with each pulse. He sat with Sadie on their cabin porch, watching the commotion of trucks and workers on the distant slope. "Can you still hear them?" he asked softly. "The singing people?" Sadie nodded, clutching her newest drawing. Figures of light now gathered around what looked like a wellspring, their hands joined in protection. "They're scared, Lijay. The machines hurt their home." Pastor Miller had organized a prayer vigil at the foot of the mountain, but mining company security prevented anyone from approaching the church. Professor Mitchell and Ms. Carter continued their documentation work. confined to the perimeter of what was rapidly becoming a work site. The core samples had already yielded promising results, according to hollow gossip. Lawrence Mercer had been overheard talking about the richest seam in 3 counties, his voice unable to disguise naked ambition. Near midday, an unfamiliar truck pulled up to the Mason cabin. An elderly man emerged with effort, his weathered face creased by sun and time. Though stooped with age, something in his bearing commanded respect. "You'd be the Mason boy," he said to Elijah without preamble. "The one who found the way back to the spring." William Mason stepped protectively onto the porch. "Can we help you, mister?" "Name's Joseph Runningwater." The old man extended a gnarled hand. "Your father knew my father, I believe." Thomas Mason worked the north face with Sam Runningwater before the '62 collapse. Recognition dawned on William's face. "You're Cherokee, from the reservation over in Cherokee County." "Half Cherokee, quarter Scots-Irish, quarter whatever else blew through these mountains." Joseph smiled faintly. "Just like most folks around here, if they're honest about their grandmothers." He'd driven 3 hours after hearing about the mining operation, he explained. His father had told him stories about the sacred spring beneath Poor Mountain. Stories passed down from ancestors who had used those waters for healing ceremonies centuries before white settlers arrived. "The place your boy found isn't just any spring," Joseph said, settling onto the porch steps with a groan of old joints. "In our stories, it's one of the doorways where the spirit world touches this one. A thin place, as the Celtic side of my family would say." From his truck, Joseph retrieved a worn leather portfolio. Inside was a document so old, its edges crumbled, despite careful handling. A land deed dated 1841, marked with signatures and thumbprints. "This is a treaty between Chief Youngbird of the Eastern Cherokee and the first settlers in this area," Joseph explained. "It specifically protected the spring and the land around it from development or resource extraction. In exchange, both communities would share access for healing purposes." Elijah leaned forward. "Does that mean the mining company can't legally dig there?" "It should," Joseph nodded. "But they'll claim the treaty was superseded by later mineral rights grants. That's why I brought it to a particular friend of mine." As if on cue, a sleek government sedan pulled up beside Joseph's truck. A sharp-dressed woman emerged, briefcase in hand, her no-nonsense demeanor marking her as someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Elizabeth Blackhawk, Department of Interior, Indian Affairs Division," she introduced herself crisply. "And I've just spent 2 fascinating hours reviewing Mr. Runningwater's documentation against the county land records." Inside the cabin, over Ruth Mason's hastily offered coffee, Elizabeth spread a map across the kitchen table. Using colored markers, she outlined overlapping boundaries: the original Cherokee treaty lands, the church property, and the mining company's claimed mineral rights. "There's a significant discrepancy," she explained, pointing to where the boundaries failed to align. "The mineral rights Coleridge mining claims were granted for this section." She circled an area adjacent to, but not including, the church site. "Someone appears to have reinterpreted the boundaries over time." "You mean they're trying to mine land they don't actually have rights to?" William asked. "It appears so. More importantly, this 1841 treaty was ratified by the state legislature in 1843, the same year the church was built. It was never abrogated, meaning it still holds legal force." Hope kindled in Elijah's chest. "So they have to stop drilling?" Elizabeth tempered her response. "It means we have grounds to file an emergency injunction. Whether a local judge will grant it against a company as powerful as Coleridge Mining—" She left the implications hanging. Joseph Runningwater cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know. The deed not only protected the spring, but established a trust for its preservation. The trustee was designated as the community of faith residing in proximity to the waters." "The hollow," Pastor Miller breathed, having joined them midway through the explanation. "Precisely," Elizabeth nodded. "Which means legally, this land doesn't belong to the mining company, the government, or even the Cherokee Nation. It belongs to the community, to all of you collectively." She produced a thick legal document from her briefcase. This is a filing to reassert the community's ownership rights under the original trust provisions. I've already submitted it electronically, but I need signatures from community representatives. Pastor Miller took the document reverently. This could actually work. It's a strong case, Elizabeth confirmed, especially combined with the historical preservation angle your researchers have developed. She checked her watch. But we need to move quickly. The county commission hearing has been moved up to tomorrow morning. They're trying to fast-track approval before we can organize opposition, William realized. As they strategized next steps, Elijah slipped outside to where Sadie still sat drawing. The distant drilling had stopped, a temporary pause or a promising sign, he couldn't tell. "What do you think?" he asked, showing her the glass fragment that hadn't left his neck since their return from the church. Sadie touched it gently. "It's getting warmer," she said. Like it knows help is coming. The Covington County Courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Miners in their clean shirts sat alongside university researchers, Hollow residents beside Cherokee elders who had traveled from 3 states away. Television cameras from regional stations lined the back wall, while reporters scribbled notes as people filed in. At the front of the room, 5 county commissioners sat behind a long table, looking uncomfortable with the attention. Judge Whitaker, serving as commission chair, gavelled the room to order. This special session addresses Coleridge Mining Company's application for extraction permits on Poor Mountain, he announced. We'll hear arguments from both sides before deliberation. Lawrence Mercer approached first, immaculate in an expensive suit. Behind him, mining executives and economic development officials waited with polished presentations and glossy handouts. Commissioners, the facts are simple, Mercer began smoothly. Coleridge Mining has held valid mineral rights to this property since 1898. Our geological surveys confirm a high-quality coal seam that would generate an estimated $50 million in revenue over 10 years. He displayed charts showing projected job creation, tax benefits, and economic multiplier effects. For a region with 28% unemployment, this project represents crucial economic lifeline. The company has already invested $3 million in preliminary work. When Mercer mentioned the church, he dismissed it as an abandoned structure without historical registration, on land that has lain dormant for 6 decades. As he concluded, Elijah whispered to Pastor Miller, "He didn't mention the spring at all." "Of course not," the pastor replied quietly. "They're pretending it doesn't exist. Easier to dismiss what you never acknowledge." Elizabeth Blackhawk rose next, her government credentials lending immediate gravitas to the proceedings. "Commissioners, I present evidence that Coleridge Mining's claimed mineral rights are fundamentally flawed." She projected a map highlighting the boundary discrepancies. Their 1898 grant explicitly excludes the quarter-acre containing the church and spring. Furthermore, this treaty from 1841, ratified by the state legislature in 1843, established the site as a protected trust administered by the local community. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Judge Whitaker frowned, clearly not expecting this legal challenge. Ms. Carter from the Historical Preservation Office followed, detailing their emergency application for protected status. This site represents a unique confluence of architectural, cultural, and historical significance, she explained, showing the 19th century photographs. Our preliminary findings suggest eligibility for both the state and national historic registers. Professor Mitchell added archaeological evidence of the site's continuous use as a sacred space dating back centuries. The historical record clearly shows this church was specifically built to protect the spring, not merely as a place of worship. Judge Whitaker interrupted, looking impatient. These academic concerns, while interesting, must be balanced against immediate economic realities. Does anyone wish to speak to the practical impact of this project? Tommy's mother stood first. "My son had leukemia last week," she said simply, guiding Tommy forward. "The doctors at Bristol Regional gave him 3 months at most." She handed over medical records. "These are his before and after blood tests. The doctors have no explanation. One by one, those who had experienced healing came forward. Mr. Lewis removed his shirt to show clear lungs on recent x-rays. Widow Harmon read aloud from the commissioner's own nameplate, something impossible days earlier. Dr. Pearson provided medical documentation for each case. As a scientist, I cannot fully explain these outcomes, he admitted. But as a physician, I cannot ignore them either. Mining company representatives shifted uncomfortably as more community members spoke, not just about healings, but about the church's historical role as a gathering place during mining disasters, its use as an underground railroad station, its significance to both white and Cherokee spiritual practices. Toward the hearing's end, Judge Whitaker recognized Joseph Runningwater. The elderly man rose slowly, dignity in every movement. "I've lived 87 years in these mountains," he began, his voice surprisingly strong. "My grandfather was born when Cherokee still held this land. My father died saving white men in the 62 mine collapse." He looked directly at the commissioners. "The waters beneath that church don't belong to mining companies or government agencies or even to a single community. They belong to the mountain itself, which has chosen to share its healing with those who approach with respect." A reverent hush fell over the room. Even the reporters stopped writing to listen. "You speak of economic value," Joseph continued. "What price do you place on a child's life restored? On lungs that can breathe again? On eyes that can see after years of darkness?" He gestured toward those who had been healed. "The worth of that spring cannot be measured in dollars or jobs. Some gifts are beyond price." As Joseph returned to his seat, Lawrence Mercer scrambled to redirect the emotional momentum. "While these anecdotes are touching, they represent unverified medical claims. What's verifiable is the economic impact of this project." When all testimony concluded, Judge Whitaker conferred briefly with the other commissioners before addressing the packed room. "This commission finds itself in an unusual position. The legal questions raised today require further investigation before any decision can be reached." He glanced at the mining executives with barely concealed apology. "Therefore, we order a 30-day stay on all activities at the site while ownership and preservation claims are properly evaluated." It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. As people filed out of the courthouse, Elijah overheard Lawrence Mercer on his phone, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're stalling. Get the night crew ready. We need core samples from directly beneath the church before any injunctions can be filed. Tonight." Elijah had learned long ago that in the hollow, even whispered conversations had a way of traveling faster than sound should allow. By sundown, word of Mercer's planned night operation had reached Pastor Miller, who moved with surprising decisiveness for a man of the cloth. "We'll hold a prayer vigil," he announced to the gathered community members at the church in the hollow. "All night if necessary. They can't drill if we're physically present. They'll just have the sheriff remove us," William Mason pointed out. "They've got the law on their side until those injunctions are filed tomorrow." Joseph Runningwater, who had remained in the hollow after the hearing, leaned on his walking stick. "Not quite. The commissioners ordered a 30-day stay on all activities. If they drill tonight, they're in contempt, unless no one witnesses it," Dr. Pearson countered. "Their night crew could finish before dawn. Claim it was done before the stay was ordered." The solution materialized organically, a continuous human presence at the church. Too large to ignore, too public to remove quietly, calls went out across 3 counties. By nightfall, cars lined the logging road leading up Poor Mountain. Hollow residents hiked familiar trails, carrying lanterns and flashlights. University students who had heard the story arrived with camping equipment. Several Cherokee families from the reservation joined Joseph, bringing traditional drums and ceremonial items. Most surprising were the miners themselves, not all, but many who had family connections to the old church, or whose children had attended the hearing and come home asking difficult questions about what mattered more, jobs or miracles. Elijah arrived with his parents and Sadie shortly after dark to find the churchyard transformed. Hundreds of candles illuminated the night, their flames steady in the still mountain air. People from diverse backgrounds gathered in small groups, some praying, others singing hymns or sharing stories. The academics documented everything, cameras flashing occasionally to capture what Professor Mitchell called a remarkable convergence of spiritual and cultural resistance. Around midnight, headlights appeared on the logging road below, mining company trucks moving slowly up the mountain. When they rounded the final bend and the church came into view, the lead vehicle stopped abruptly. No one had expected to find over 200 people keeping vigil, or the media vans that had followed the story from the courthouse. Sheriff Davis stepped from his patrol car, looking deeply uncomfortable as he approached Pastor Miller at the church steps. "This is a peaceful religious gathering," the pastor said before the sheriff could speak, "on land that legally belongs to this community under the trust provisions presented today. I've got orders to clear the area for safety reasons," the sheriff replied, though without conviction. "Company says there's risk of subsidence from yesterday's drilling." "Interesting," Elizabeth Blackhawk remarked, materializing beside them with a reporter in tow. "Since any drilling in this exact location would directly violate the commission's stay order." Lawrence Mercer emerged from one of the company vehicles, his tailored suit replaced by a more practical jacket, his face tight with controlled fury. "This is private property under valid mineral lease. These people are trespassing." "Actually," Joseph Runningwater countered, "they're the beneficial owners exercising their rights under the trust. As established in the hearing today, the standoff might have escalated further if not for the arrival of William Mason, who had spent decades working alongside these very mining officials. "Harold," he addressed the mine superintendent directly, "you've lived in these mountains your whole life. Your daddy worked these seams alongside mine. Is this really how you want to be remembered? The man who destroyed something sacred for a few more tons of coal." Something shifted in Superintendent Blackburn's weathered face, a flicker of doubt perhaps, or recognition of a larger truth. He glanced at the church with its glowing windows, at the diverse crowd unified in purpose, at his own men shifting uncomfortably beside their equipment. "Pull back," he ordered suddenly. "We'll wait for the legal issues to resolve." "You don't have authority to make that call," Mercer snapped. "In matters of mining operations and safety, I do." Blackburn's voice hardened. "And I'm not sending my men to drill where they might be disturbing something they shouldn't." As the company vehicles retreated down the mountain, a spontaneous cheer rose from the gathered crowd. But Pastor Miller cautioned against premature celebration. "They'll be back with court orders and corporate attorneys," he warned. "This is just the beginning." Throughout the night, the vigil continued. People took turns resting while others kept watch. Elijah found himself sitting beside the church steps with Sadie, who had been unusually quiet all evening. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing how tightly she clutched her latest drawing. "They're gathering," she whispered, showing him the paper. She had drawn hundreds of luminous figures surrounding the church, their forms connected by threads of light that extended deep into the mountain. All of them, from all the times before. Around 3 a.m., William Mason made the difficult climb up the mountain path, his injured leg protesting each step. He found Elijah and settled beside him on the church steps. "Proud of you, son," he said simply. "Standing up for something bigger than yourself." "I just found the church," Elijah demurred. "I didn't do anything special." His father shook his head. "The church found you." "There's a difference." As dawn approached, the vigil keepers gathered closer to the church. Joseph Runningwater led a Cherokee blessing ceremony at the eastern edge of the property, his sonorous chants rising into the lightening sky. Pastor Miller followed with prayers from the Christian tradition, while those of other faiths or no particular belief added their own forms of reverence. The first rays of sunlight crested the mountain ridge, striking the church steeple and bathing the gathered community in golden light, reminiscent of what Elijah had seen on his first approach. As if responding to the dawn, hundreds of candles flickered in unison, though there was no wind to explain the synchronized movement. What happened at dawn defied explanation. As the synchronized candle flames steadied, a low humming filled the air, not mechanical but harmonic, as if the mountain itself were singing. The sound grew, resonating through the ground beneath their feet, vibrating in their chests. Those nearest the church doors reported seeing a blue-gold luminescence seeping through the wood grain. Sadie, half asleep in her mother's arms, sat up suddenly. "Listen," she whispered. "They're all singing together." The light intensified, radiating outward from the church in concentric ripples, visible even in the strengthening daylight. Cameras flashed as reporters and researchers attempted to document the phenomenon. The university scientists exchanged bewildered glances, their instruments registering electromagnetic anomalies that shouldn't be possible. And then, as suddenly as it began, the manifestation subsided, though something had fundamentally shifted in the atmosphere. Even the most skeptical felt it, a sense of presence, of witness. By mid-morning, footage of the event had reached regional news stations. By noon, national outlets picked up the story. Satellite trucks lined the logging road as journalists struggled to reconcile the empirical evidence with explanations that wouldn't strain credibility. Governor Harrison, facing mounting public interest and potential religious freedom implications, called an emergency meeting at the state capitol. County commissioners, mining executives, community representatives, and state officials gathered in the oak-paneled conference room normally reserved for budget negotiations. Judge Whitaker, visibly uncomfortable with the national spotlight, opened the proceedings. Given the extraordinary circumstances and public interest, this special session will determine a path forward regarding the Poor Mountain Church site. Lawrence Mercer presented first, his previous confidence notably diminished. The mining company had prepared a modified proposal. They would extract coal from adjacent land, but leave the church and immediate surroundings untouched. Coleridge. "Mining recognizes the site's cultural significance," he stated carefully, avoiding any mention of miraculous events. "If we propose a 50-foot buffer zone around the church structure itself." Elizabeth Blackhawk countered immediately. "Completely inadequate. The geological surveys clearly show the underground spring system extends at least a quarter mile in all directions. Any mining activity within that radius would threaten the aquifer." Dr. Eleanor Wright, the hydrologist, confirmed this assessment with detailed water flow models. "The spring's unique properties depend on this specific geological formation remaining intact. Even minor disruption to surrounding strata could permanently alter its composition." As technical discussions continued, Elijah sat quietly beside Pastor Miller, observing the proceedings with growing awareness that the adults were talking around the central truth. The spring wasn't merely water with unusual mineral content. It was something science lacked language to describe adequately. When Governor Harrison asked for community input, Pastor Miller deferred unexpectedly to Elijah. This young man found the spring when it was needed. Perhaps he should speak to its importance. Facing the imposing table of officials, Elijah found his voice steadier than expected. "The spring isn't just under the church," he began. "It's why the church exists. People have been protecting it for generations. First the Cherokee, then the settlers, then the mining families themselves." He described his first encounter with the church, carefully omitting the more mystical elements while emphasizing the historical connections documented by Professor Mitchell. "This place connects us to our past and our future. It doesn't belong to any one person or company. It belongs to the mountain and the people who call it home." As discussion continued, an unexpected intervention came from Harold Blackburn, the mining superintendent who had halted the night drilling operation. "I've worked Poor Mountain for 35 years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My grandfather died in the 24 collapse. My father in 62. He paused, gathering himself. "Last night I saw something I can't explain. But I know this. There's coal elsewhere. There's only one spring." The revelation that followed shocked even those familiar with local mining history. Blackburn produced decades-old company surveys showing substantial coal deposits extending eastward, away from the church and spring system, on land Coleridge already owned but had never developed. "We've always known about the eastern seam," he admitted, "but the extraction costs were higher, so we focused on easier targets." The governor recognized an elegant solution when presented with one. By late afternoon, a preliminary agreement had been drafted. Coleridge would redirect operations to the eastern deposits. In exchange, the state would expedite permits and provide tax incentives for the more expensive extraction method. The church, and a half-mile radius around it, would receive permanent protected status under a conservation easement. Most importantly, ownership would be formalized in a community land trust, combining elements from the 1841 treaty and modern legal protections. The trust would be jointly administered by Hollow residents, Cherokee representatives, and a historical preservation board. As the document circulated for signatures, Elizabeth Blackhawk slid a folded paper to Elijah. "The official preservation order," she explained quietly. "It takes effect immediately." Outside the Capitol, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. The governor emerged first, announcing the historically significant compromise, balancing economic development with cultural preservation. Lawrence Mercer followed, putting the best corporate face on what amounted to a strategic retreat. "Coleridge Mining has always valued community heritage," he claimed, as if the preceding weeks of conflict had never occurred. When the Hollow residents finally exited, they found themselves surrounded by reporters seeking sound bites about miracles and healing waters. Pastor Miller fielded most questions diplomatically. "We are simply grateful the site will be preserved for future generations," as cameras flashed around them. Elijah felt the glass fragment warm against his chest, not in warning this time, but in what felt remarkably like satisfaction. 1 year later, spring sunshine warmed the newly restored church on Poor Mountain. The weathered boards had been carefully replaced while preserving the original structure's integrity. The stained glass windows gleamed, each one telling part of the spring's story, from Cherokee stewardship through mining-era protections to the recent preservation battle. A modest parking area accommodated visitors, though a gated road and posted schedule ensured the site never became overcrowded. The guest book in the church vestibule contained signatures from across the country and beyond, people drawn by stories of healing, history, or simply curiosity about the mountain church that had made national headlines. Elijah, now 13 and several inches taller, sat on the front pew, watching Sadie lead a small tour group. His sister had appointed herself unofficial junior guide, her natural storytelling ability making her a favorite with visitors. "The spring has been here longer than any of us," she explained to the attentive group. "The church was built to protect it, not the other way around." At 10 years old, with clear lungs and boundless energy, she showed no traces of the illness that had nearly claimed her life. Outside, the Poor Mountain Heritage Foundation's modest office handled the practical aspects of site management. Funded with seed money from several regional philanthropies, the foundation now employed 6 Hollow residents, including William Mason, who had traded coal dust for conservation. As the site's head of maintenance, the compromise agreement had delivered on its promises. Coleridge Mining had opened the eastern seam, providing stable employment while leaving the sacred site undisturbed. The economic benefits extended beyond mining jobs. The heritage tourism brought new revenue streams to the previously isolated community. More profound changes had occurred beneath the surface. The Hollow's division between mining families and church families had healed, as both recognized their shared history as protectors of the mountain's gifts. The Cherokee connection had been restored, with seasonal ceremonies acknowledging ancestral ties to the sacred waters. Dr. Pearson and Professor Mitchell had established a small research center focused on the spring's unique properties, though their findings remained carefully circumscribed. The water's most extraordinary qualities defied conventional scientific frameworks, suggesting what Dr. Pearson called natural processes not yet encompassed by our current understanding. The healing continued, though in more controlled ways. Access to the spring itself remained strictly limited, with a committee of Hollow elders, Cherokee representatives, and medical advisors evaluating applications. Those permitted to visit the waters did so with reverence and privacy. Their experiences kept largely personal rather than publicized. As afternoon light slanted through the windows, the tour group departed, leaving Elijah alone in the quiet sanctuary. Pastor Miller entered and settled beside him on the pew. "Penny for your thoughts," the pastor said. Elijah touched the stained glass fragment that still hung around his neck. Unlike the year before, it no longer glowed visibly, though it maintained a subtle warmth against his skin. "I was wondering if I did the right thing," he admitted, "finding this place, sharing it with others. Sometimes I think it might have been better left hidden." Pastor Miller considered this thoughtfully. "The spring revealed itself to you because it was time. The waters were meant to flow, not remain sealed away forever." Through the open church door, they could see Sadie chatting animatedly with Joseph Runningwater, who, despite his advanced age, still made monthly visits to the site. The old man had become something of a grandfather figure to both Mason children, sharing stories and wisdom from his dual heritage. "Besides," the pastor continued, "look what's grown from that discovery. Not just healings, but healing of a different kind. The Hollow united, old wrongs acknowledged. Different traditions finding common ground." Elijah nodded slowly. The past year had transformed not just the church and the community, but himself as well. He had discovered a capacity for leadership, a voice that people respected despite his youth. His perspective had expanded beyond the narrow confines of Hollow life, connecting him to something ancient and enduring. As Pastor Miller departed for evening services down in the Hollow, Elijah remained in the church. The setting sun cast the sanctuary in that same golden light he'd witnessed on his first visit, a quality of illumination that somehow felt both natural and otherworldly simultaneously. Moving to the altar, he knelt and placed his palm against the wooden floor. Beneath, he could sense rather than hear the spring flowing, the heartbeat of the mountain continuing its eternal rhythm. The voices no longer sang audibly as they once had, but sometimes, in moments of stillness like this, he caught whispers at the edge of perception. Not words exactly, but impressions, continuity, gratitude, vigilance. A reminder that some gifts came with ongoing responsibility. In the guest book by the door, visitors had recorded their experiences in dozens of languages and perspectives. Profound peace, unexpected clarity, a sense of connection to something larger. The simplest entry, written in a child's unsteady hand, perhaps captured it best. "I came looking for a miracle and found something better, the truth that miracles have always been here, waiting for us to notice." As twilight deepened, Elijah finally rose and stepped outside. The first stars appeared above the mountain ridge, echoing the crystalline formations deep beneath the church. Both above and below, lights that had guided generations continued their patient vigil, connecting past to future through the brief, beautiful present. Some mysteries, Elijah had learned, weren't meant to be fully explained, only experienced, protected, and passed forward into caring hands. He touched the glass fragment once more, feeling its reassuring warmth, and began the familiar path down the mountain toward home.